This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
That's what real policy achieves. Not rowing around Newcastle Harbour. That doesn't bring emissions down. Real policies bring emissions down.
We're stuck with the hosts of Chapo Shithouse podcast.
Serious danger to Australia.
Hello, Danger Dogs. It's me, Emerald Moon, and this is Serious Danger, a podcast about green politics in Australia, not an official Green Party podcast, and produced by Michael the Griffin. I'm doing this intro by myself with no funny stuff up the top with Tom this week because he's away, he's gallivanting around, I don't know, doing God knows what in Europe, wherever he is this week.
He's been gone so long.
He has. I know, and I'm really starting to, and I'm, trying to explain to people in my life that my co-host is just running around Europe and has left me abandoned. But not to worry, because we have a wonderful return guest to sub in for Tom this week because Rachel Withers is back. We're going to be passing the Bechdel test, discussing, politics. So hi, Rachel. Thank you for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
This week we are going to take a journey through the week that was, including just everyone hating on the Greens from, Jewish and Zionist peak groups to the Labor Party freaking out about how to deal with the Greens, and then talking about Parliament's commemoration of 7th of October and Fatima Payman's new party. But first, just a quick thank you to our new Patreon subscribers. Thank you, Paul, Mallory, Amy, Tessa, Robert, and Rob. Robert and Rob, I like that. Need a Bob in there as well. But thank you for signing up on the Patreon. We had a few people comment specifically about the episode that we just put out last week for Patreon subscribers, which was a special kind of retrospective on 1 year since the 7th of October with Nasser Mashni, the co-founder and president of Australian Palestine Advocacy Network, or APAN. And that was a really, I think, moving chat. He's fantastic. I suspect some folks may have signed up just to hear that episode, and a few folks were saying, Eve, for example, on Patreon said, every episode is my favorite, but this one really, truly was. And it is lovely. And it's only $3 a month if you want to sign up on the Patreon, help pay Mike and keep the show going, and also get access to an extra bonus episode every 2 weeks. One more quick piece of housekeeping before we get into it is a quick reminder to get your tickets for the live shows that are coming up next month in New South Wales. We're going to be in Newcastle for the Rising Tide People's Blockade of the world's largest coal port on Saturday, the 23rd of November, and then Sydney, Sunday, the 24th of November. You can get your tickets at seriousdangerpod.com. Okay, housekeeping done. I'm going to introduce you properly now, Rachel. For people who don't remember Rachel from previous episodes or follow her on Twitter or read all her writings and things like that, she is a great writer, the former editor of the Politics, someone whose brain is unfortunately also poisoned by being interested in Australian politics, currently hosting Spin Cycle on Triple R Radio and writing for Crikey as well, including the weekly Forget the Front Bench column. Hello again, Rachel. Already said hi, but hey.
Hello, Emerald.
We did have to do, before we talk about the substantive, content of the week, I do have to ask you something very important, which is, have you ever received a cold call from a political staffer demanding that you door knock for them and calling you a fraud when you refuse?
Look, I can't say that's ever happened to me.
No, it seems to be happening all over the place.
I don't know a lot about how volunteer recruitment works, but that doesn't really sound like something that would be a normal way to conduct
real.
that.
No. I, of course, am referring to, for people who are maybe not on Twitter or who didn't see this.
Lucky them.
Yeah, that's right. This person, Craig Hill, posted a tweet this week. It begins, it's one of those long, they're a premium subscriber, so it's this long-ass tweet. I received a phone call this afternoon asking if I would be interested in working as an advisor on Max Chandler-Mather's supposed campaign to help the homeless. Straight off the bat, I feel like I don't know that anyone's calling, just cold calling people from a political office and being like, will you be an advisor on this campaign?
Yeah. Especially not someone, I just had a quick look at Craig Hill's Twitter, someone who seems to hate the Greens quite a lot. And have it in for Max Chandler Mather, who he's referred to as his least favourite politician.
That's quite funny. Probably a few people. But look, so he goes on, he says, I agreed and asked what they want me to do. Their reply was to door knock in his, that is Max Chandler Mather's electorate, and let people know the great work Max is doing. I politely pointed out that this would be of absolutely no benefit to anybody except Max. I also pointed out that to date, Max has not actually done anything of any consequence other than to block any legislation that would actually be of assistance. The woman then became extremely aggressive and abusive, claiming that any refusal to door knock for Max meant that I had never been serious about helping the homeless and was a fraud. It seems that Max's staff are as self-centered, arrogant, immature, and narrow-minded as Max himself is. I'm not a journalist, so Rachel, can you verify this for me? What do you like? Is this? How do you even start unpacking this and figuring out if it's real or not?
I mean, with something like this, I don't know that there's much point in a journalist spending their time digging into it. But it does seem like in the comments, people were like, have you got any evidence of this? And he said basically, oh, no, I'm not going to throw the staffer under the bus. He then supposedly went on 2GB to talk about it, or he said he was going to. I don't know if
that actually happened. Yeah. I don't know if I saw the two. Yeah.
People were like, where's the audio? And he's like, oh, it was a pre-record that it didn't make it up.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's sad. I mean, they probably, I guess, made the editorial decision that maybe it wasn't wise to just publish claims from the internet outlet. I don't know. I mean, he did publish his own article, I see, in Independent Australia. I thought it
is a longer version of the tweet, basically.
It's a longer version of the tweet. It also seems to double down on his reply when someone asked for evidence was basically to provide evidence of his qualifications or his experience working on the issue of homelessness. It was nothing about the call itself. And this article, it really takes that angle. It's like, this week, I received a phone call from Max Chandler Mather's office praising me for my previous successes in working with the homeless in Brisbane.
Look. I mean, Emerald, you're Brisbane based. Have you heard of this man?
I've not heard of this man. And I am trying to figure out what has happened here, because obviously, what he's saying is not what's happened. It's just obviously not true that someone from Max's office has called them up and then started abusing them and called them a fraud for not wanting to door knock in Max's electorate. We have a state election happening right now in Queensland, in 2 weeks' time. Max is not door knocking for the federal the federal campaigns aren't door knocking. Max isn't asking anyone to door knock for him. So I know straight up that that's not true. I think it's possible that this person expressed an interest in volunteering, thinking I would like to be an advisor because I am so experienced and accomplished in the area of addressing homelessness in Brisbane. And then when they were contacted and told the ways that they could help the movement, they were like, no, I want to be a policy advisor. And then, I don't know, were offended at being told that maybe that wasn't that helpful at that point. That's just my guess. I don't really know.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is their website sort of goes through all of the many things they've done in their life, and they're a member of the Democrats. So again, I'm not sure why they would have been trying to apply for work with the Greens, or why the Greens would have been reaching out to this individual. The one thing that really gets me, I think, about that long tweet originally saying, why would I door knock for a candidate that would only benefit the candidate? I mean, that's an argument that could be mounted for any kind of door knocking, for any kind of political candidate. That's not necessarily only for the benefit of that person. If you believe in the policies of a particular party and you door knock, you're not necessarily doing it just to help that person. And he claims that it would be of absolutely no benefit to anybody except Max. And I don't think people only go out to benefit politicians when they go out to door knock.
But I think there is that's the perception of Max Chandler Mather in particular. There's definitely a subset of Australian politics that believe that Max is extremely egotistic. It's all about Max. It's about him and his personality and his ego, which I think is a bit of a chicken or the egg situation where the media and political class are fascinated and obsessed with Max and make it all about him as a personality and an individual. I'm not sure if it's necessarily the other way around. Yeah.
Yeah. And look, when I went to write my Forget the Front Bench column recently on Max Taylor Mather, like having sort of skimmed all of the coverage, all the profiles, there have been so many profiles. I almost thought, like, does this need to be done? But one of the words that is like constantly leveled at him is annoying and like grandstanding and all of these words. And as you say, chicken and the egg, it kind of is like a self-reinforcing situation now, because so many people have called him annoying that you can't really write a profile on him without pointing out the annoying thing.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, my tactic was to ask him about it and ask him why he thinks people
and wasn't he like, I probably am a bit.
I mean, there was a long answer that sort of, you know, about being frustrated with the system and with people being in Parliament House and not doing anything with the power they have. And then at the end, he sort of, it was. At the end, he's like, I guess that's a bit annoying.
I mean, it's like, what makes someone annoying? Is it just that they annoy people? Because if so, he's really annoying. Particularly annoying apparently to Craig, because Craig Hill was a Reddit moderator who allowed Max to come on Reddit and do an AMA, and then Max didn't thank him personally. That was like a follow-up tweet. So that might be part of what's happening here.
And a bunch of people pointed out, like, they grabbed like a snippet of the AMA where he said thank you, just a general thank you. But the problem seems to be
not thank you,
that he didn't
Craig
thank
Hill.
the moderator. Yes. Moderator Craig Hill, thank you. Thank you for your moderation.
And your hard work for solving homelessness in Brisbane. Look, okay, well, we solved that one. Fact-checked by Serious Danger. Now we can get into it. Let's get into some more stories about more people who fucking hate the Greens.
So many of them.
We've got this. We don't know if we'll have time, but look, we'll do our best.
Nobody likes me, everybody hates me. I think I'll go eat worms. Great big juicy ones, teeny weeny squeeny ones. See how they wiggle and squirm.
We wanted to, like, this came up obviously a few weeks ago, and we sort of wanted to talk about it, but, you know, there's been a few things on. We didn't talk about it at the time, but this event that started getting advertised by Labor Academy, which I understand is like a Labor member kind of group thing, but started advertising this event a few weeks ago called Dealing with the Greens. I don't know why it's capitalised like that, but that's how it is. Tips for campaigners. It initially said that the speakers would be Michael Alesi, Anthony, do you know how to pronounce this last name? Anthony Cianfloni? I have no idea.
I've wondered before. Sounds
really
about right.
No idea. And Emma Dawson. I noticed that the only one who actually remained by the time of the event was Emma Dawson, who's from Labor-aligned think tank Per Capita, and then the others were replaced by LEAN, or Labor Environment Action Network, convener Louise Crawford, and then Ben Badham's partner, Ben Davidson. What did you think initially? Like, it was posted on Twitter. I think someone was like, who wants to go to this event with me? Looks a bit funny, more in kind of green circles in Twitter. What did you think when you saw that this was something they decided to put on?
I mean, I was actually quite interested in it. I wasn't able to watch it because I had a Triple R event, but I remember being at Labor conference in Brisbane last year, and there was a very similar event that was put on called, I found the screenshot, Reclaiming the Progressive Vote. It didn't mention the Greens. It was like just Labor branded. And that was Jed Carney, the member for Cooper, Darcy Byrne, who's the mayor of Inner West Sydney and like a long-time Albanese ally, Senator Anthony Chisholm. And it was very much like how, and I think Dee Madigan stepped into that one. She's not listed on the event, but I think she ended up, who's like the sort of marketing whiz of Labor. And I went along to that because I'm so interested in this constant tussle between Labor and the Greens, and this like argument over the progressive vote and trying to win back the progressive vote, and from Labor, how do we get it back? And at none of these events or in these think pieces does it ever seem to be that the answer is adopt more progressive policies. And certainly at the event I went to,
by the progressive vote, you know,
that
like,
wasn't. It was like, how do we brand ourselves, and how do you talk to people who are concerned about the environment? Like, how do you talk to them? Not how do you actually do things about the environment?
Yeah. Well, I think this is interesting, right? Because the event description, I don't know if you read the full event description on the ticket sales website. It is really something, but it's very charged. It's really throwing the Greens, slinging some mud at the Greens. It begins, the Greens party certainly don't like Labor. They want to replace us. They know they are better than we are in every way, and they feel entitled to change the world from the crossbench, solve global conflict from the suburbs, and define identities and the private lives of other people. Like, this part, obviously dripping in irony
like
there.
They know they are better than we are. I know it was meant to be ironic, but that really depends on tone.
That's right. It
they
kind
know
of is
they're
like
better than us.
They know they're better than us, and they're fucking using it against us. And how dare they? It's really awful of them. But there's like this thing, I mean, I'm sort of skipping ahead a little bit, but it's like I saw that when Emma Dawson spoke to The Guardian for Josh Butler's opinion piece on this, she kind of had a bit softer lines, and she was talking about how, the rise of the Greens and taking the Greens seriously should affect Labor's policymaking is what she was referring to, which would imply that that seems to be pushing for, hey, maybe we should consider the fact that people are turning towards the Greens because they like their policies, and we should consider that if we want to stop them, quote unquote, taking the progressive vote away from Labor. But then it sounds as though that's not necessarily what is being posited at these actual events. It's not about policy and ideology. It's about strategy and, convincing voters that even if we don't change up, if we just stay exactly where we are, we'll still be the right ones for them. We just need to pull them back to us.
It's that Principal Skinner meme.
Yeah,
they go out of touch. No, it's the children who are wrong.
Yeah, it's the voters who are wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Josh Butler piece in The Guardian was very good at sort of pointing out the different tone you get. You've got Anthony Albanese acting like the Greens are silly and immature and not to be taken seriously and to be sort of swatted away like an annoying fly. But then these grassroots campaigners, as Butler describes them, suggesting that actually, no, this is something that we might need to take seriously. But then, I suppose once, of course, I haven't watched this event from Tuesday night, but it seems like once they actually get in the room, it does turn into sort of a airing of grievances against the Greens instead of actually talking about policy or what it is that's appealing about the Greens.
There's this clip. I mean, I also don't have the full event or a recording of the event, but there is a clip where it's Ben Davidson just trashing the Greens for a good 5 minutes. Well, sort of begins by trashing them and then goes on to how to campaign against them.
So you start to hear about their demands that are unconstitutional, their refusal to meet with Labor prime ministers, premiers, whatever the case might be.
That's just bullshit, right? From what I understand, the Greens have been trying to negotiate with Labor on housing bills in particular, and Labor just refuses to meet with them or to provide any sort of counterpoint. I don't really know what he's referring to there. Yeah,
it's an ongoing argument that Labor says the Greens aren't negotiating with them. The Greens say, no, we've put things on the table. Labor's not negotiating with us. But then where is the actual, where's the give and take, what's been put on the table? They're quite secretive about whether anything has been put on the table. So
I guess that's true.
And really, they're taking the Green brand beyond the environment and trying to occupy a place of dissatisfaction. And which, to be honest, there are people who are dissatisfied. And it's not even that they're just dissatisfied with Labor, they're actually dissatisfied with democracy. And what the Greens today are doing, their brand is tapping into people who feel as though they are not being heard by major parties.
Feel that way. I'm sorry you feel that you're not being heard.
Not only that they're not being heard, but that they should, because they either occupy a space where they believe they have greater intellectual capacity than others, or because they believe that their ideas are better than others, that they should be able to dictate terms to a majoritarian representative government. Now, of course, that is, in any other time in human history, feudalism. And the Green brand really represents that very well. So you've got...
Sorry. That's feudalism, and the Greens brand represents that very well? I heard that right.
Yeah, I think the suggestion there is that because the Greens don't have a majority and yet are trying to have a say on policy, that's feudalism. Never mind that Labor also doesn't have a majority. Nobody currently has a majority in the Senate. But that's feudalism from the Greens to try to have a say.
Yeah, and I think there's I guess we're getting here, it's a similar to, that opening paragraph about they know that they're so much better than us. Like, I guess that's what he's trying to say here. They think that they're smarter, they think that they're better.
Yes,
and because their ideas are smarter and better, they can, quote unquote, dictate to a majoritarian, government, even when they don't actually hold a majority.
I would say also, it seems to be this idea that people are being tricked somehow. Yes. People are frustrated. He acknowledges people are feeling disappointed and frustrated. But again, rather than talking about what needs to be done, it's like, how dare a political party try to speak to that?
Yeah, that's right. Like, and yes, I just think, when he says, they feel as though they're not being listened to by the major parties. And again, it's like, have you considered that they're actually not being listened to by the major parties? Like, when you look at polling on issues that the Greens are talking about, like things like rent caps, things like prices on, essential items like groceries, public ownership, climate action, corporate money in politics, like all of those, there is majority significant public support for. Negative gearing is another one, for example. And so I think it's quite fair to say that ordinary people aren't being listened to by major party politicians, and not just that they feel as though they're not being listened to, but by saying it's just that they feel that way and they've been made to feel that way by the Greens, then you can kind of disregard any idea that maybe you are the one that's wrong and you should consider changing your policies and your approach in Parliament, right?
Well, there seems to be an unshakable belief among members of Labor that the Greens don't actually want to fix any of these problems. I don't know exactly where this idea comes from, but you hear it a little bit, I think, with Ben there, is that he really doesn't believe they want to fix this. He thinks they are acting like populists who are tapping into those frustrations and all of those issues. But he genuinely believes that the Greens don't want to fix that, which is what baffles me about kind of this ongoing antagonism between Labor and the Greens. And I suppose especially the antagonism from Labor towards the Greens, just hating them, this party on their left flank, but they won't actually accept that they are to the left of them. That, I mean, they want to believe they're like the actual left-wing party, and that the Greens are just wreckers or blockers or
well, that's what
people who are in it for votes.
I mean, I think it's a bit of projection. Like, I think that the Labor Party is it's a long established political party, like a very, I guess, entrenched institution in that, like, many people would argue, I would probably argue, that its main aim has become to perpetuate its own existence, like to sustain its own existence, and that its main aim no longer is, I guess, positive or genuine policy change. I don't necessarily think that's the case for every Labor member, obviously.
Yeah, I was going to say that may be the case for the party, but there are a bunch of people within the party who are progressive and do want to achieve progressive ends, and somehow view people who've chosen a different political vehicle to try to do that as fake, as the enemy. It's like, as
you're all doing politics. You're all doing electoral politics. Like, you all want to win votes. That's, because your theory of change is that by winning votes, you can achieve the change that you want. But yes, I guess part of, the poison of electoral politics is that it becomes hard to believe that anyone else is actually in it for the right reasons.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know how this is going to resolve itself, really. I mean, I feel like this growing antagonism is something I have been tracking since my days of student politics, really. But like one of the first things I ever wrote was for Junkie, like about the, you know, in 2016, the relationship between Labor and the Greens. And it just seems to get worse and worse. And the more votes the Greens win off Labor and the more seats, the more they hate them, the more they seem to want to cut them out of any negotiation, not deal them in, not work with them in the hopes that that will suppress that vote, in the hopes that by not working with them, those who elected Greens hoping that they could pull Labor further to the left will eventually give up and go back to Labor, and then Labor can have a majority again. But I think what we're seeing is we're heading to this point now, assuming the Greens pick up even one extra seat at the next federal election, where it's going to become pretty much inevitable that Labor does have to start working with the Greens, or they're going to choose the Teals, perhaps. But over time, I think it is going to get to a point where it's like almost unfeasible for Labor to form government without the Greens. That's where I think we're going. And I wonder if Labor, at what point they will accept that, and at what point this how do we destroy the Greens brand will end, or if it never will. I mean, the longest serving government in the country is a Labor Greens government in the ACT. That's the longest serving. It's pretty stable. At this point, ACT Labor can't form government without the Greens or someone else. That pact is actually starting to break down at the moment. But it's inevitable that if you're going to try to be a centre-left party and you're not going to please your left-wing voters, there's going to be a left-wing force that is either going to pull you from the outside or push you from the inside. It looks like lefties have chosen the outside at this point.
Yeah, I think, and that's, well, I think we're clearly at some sort of inflection point, right? Because the Greens are really starting to break through, especially since 2022. And that's why there does seem to be a split in what the strategy is here. And it reflects this broader kind of, you know, dissonance or confusion over how to attack or even just perceive the Greens, and whether you dismiss them as ridiculous, silly, incompetent, you know, like you say, a fly to be flicked away, or whether they are a serious, you know, a real serious danger, a genuine threat, something to be taken seriously and responded to in that way. And I think that that's not just the way that Labor's having to deal with how to deal with them. It's groups on the quote unquote other side of politics as well. Like I think you see now groups like Advance, who have said that they are going to spend, you know, $5 million attacking the Greens, and the way that they're doing that is by actually pivoting away from probably what conservative groups would have previously done, which is paint the Greens as ridiculous hippies, towards, no, they're a serious political force, and that's dangerous because they have real policies and they are seeking to form government ultimately, and that's really scary and bad.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the Advance is doing this. The Australian, you know, the media wing of Advance, I suppose, has also started doing this as well. They're often called the extreme Greens in headlines in any of the Murdoch outlets. The Teals are also being painted as also extreme Greens by, you know, constantly pointing out how often the Teals vote with the Greens. I think this is kind of to be expected from the Murdoch media and the far right in Australia. But I think the concern is when you get the Labor Party buying into those kind of talking points from Advance and News Corp, that the Greens are extreme, the Greens are anti-Semitic, the Greens are dangerous. When, you know, on the ideological spectrum, Labor sits a lot closer to the Greens. I mean, some people may disagree with that, but then they do to Advance. But Labor chooses to buy into this criticism of the left because it suits their electoral prospects. It suits them to have their rivals to the left dismissed as ridiculous. But at the same time, then they're just buying into this idea that progressive reform, real climate action, major action on housing, tax reform is extreme and dangerous, and then making it harder for themselves to ever do anything.
That's right, yeah. And I think that's exactly what, you know, conservative and far right groups want, and thinking about the Zionist lobby, for example, the reports this week, again in the Oz initially, about this letter that was sent by the Executive Council of Australian Jewry and the Zionist Federation of Australia, demanding that both major party leaders agree to not do any sort of deals with the Greens, not work with them in a minority government situation, and to agree to preference them below the other major parties. So for Labor, primarily, to preference the Liberals above the Greens. And I think, from what Albanese hasn't come out and said, "Oh yes, we're going to do that now." But I imagine he's obviously under pressure to do so.
He's always saying in interviews that we won't enter minority government with the Greens, and that's the thing that gets said to be like, don't vote for minor parties because. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it'll be down to the numbers. If they have to, they will. I think they'd rather probably deal with the Teals than the Greens at this point. But that's not actually a promise any politician can make. You saw it before the Tasmanian state election. Neither of us will do deals, and it's like, well, neither of you got a majority then. So one of you ended up doing deals. Yeah. I mean, with the kind of calls from the Zionist Federation of Australia and the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, I mean, they have been quite successful, I would say, in painting the Greens as the extreme outliers on this conflict, despite the fact that, polls and protests and public sentiment is not actually sitting over there. But again, Labor has bought into this idea that the Greens are this violent, disruptive, socially disruptive group. And, we saw that a few months ago when Labor chose to team up with the Coalition to pass a motion condemning the Greens for undermining social cohesion. Meanwhile, you have, the Coalition just this past week refusing to support a very centrist motion to mark.
Yeah. So I didn't follow this. Explain to me what went down with the motion, because this was around 7th of October, right?
Yeah. So obviously it's been a pretty vile week for the public debate around this. But on October 8, when Parliament sat, the Labor Party tried to pass a motion to commemorate October 7, I suppose, as they were always going to, and it was quite a long motion. And in that motion, it was a lot about October 7, but it also mourned all lives lost, and mentioned Palestinian and Lebanese lives. It didn't call for a ceasefire, but it did support efforts for de-escalation towards a ceasefire. It was basically a motion that really tried to be as straight down the line and centrist as possible,
of course,
on this. The Greens didn't support it either because Adam Bandt said it didn't condemn Israel's war crimes, and so the Greens abstained. But we saw the Coalition, who apparently Labor had actually tried to work with on this motion and had sought bipartisanship, stand up and refuse to support it because it mentioned lives other than Israeli lives lost on October 7, and because it mentioned de-escalation.
Well, how can you equate, Israeli lives with Palestinian lives? They're just not the same.
I summed it up. I was quite taken aback. I didn't know exactly what's coming watching Parliament that day, but I summed it up as Labor, all lives matter. Coalition, no, they don't. It was, it's funny, the Coalition is so extreme on this stuff, and so how dare you mention anything that's not about our poor darling Israel, that they're so extreme they actually make Labor look quite reasonable. Because they really tried to do something that could please everyone. Around October 7, they were, I think, trying to also make statements along similar lines, but Albanese still went to a synagogue on October 7 instead of to, like, you know, any of the other vigils going on, multi-faith vigils, pro-Palestine vigils. Albanese was still making his, like, I am backing Israel here quite clear.
Yeah.
But for Peter Dutton, that's not enough. You need to like be literally celebrating this genocide or you're anti-Semitic. And like Albanese got booed when he went to the synagogue. Like nothing is enough for these people.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to – I mean, this is the thing. Like you can bend over backwards and try to, I guess, play both sides in the way that Labor has done in refusing to condemn Israel's war crimes and, you know, refusing to be kind of steadfast in calling for a ceasefire, let alone an end to the occupation. And yet it's not enough. Like he's booed.
He still gets slammed by the Australian. October 7, like the front page of the Weekend Australian was about like Labor's failed on anti-Semitism.
Yeah. And the millions of people who want action for Palestine and action against the unfolding genocide in Gaza and to stop Israel from, you know, expanding its bombardment and invasion into Lebanon now. Obviously they're not pleased either. So it is a classic, I think, Labor fucking miscalculation and being, squished in between trying to be this centrist party while actually probably a lot of their base really want them to be more progressive. And I don't think it's going to work out for them.
I mean, again, I sort of watching the coalition and various Zionist bodies attacking Labor over the last few days, like you're sort of reminded of how they got to this point because they are just beaten over the head by the conservative media if they so much as acknowledge the existence of Palestinian lives.
I mean, but this is the thing. I'm like, as someone from the Greens, I'm like, oh, where the media were mean to you, like stand by your principles, you know?
Yeah. And before, you know, like many years ago, Anthony Albanese was standing exactly where the Greens were, and he doesn't anymore. You know, he was incredibly pro-Palestine, and you know, there's old interviews and clips and speeches you can find.
Yeah,
but there is no pleasing the Zionist lobby, as you can see. Like they're going to demand that the Labor Party put the Greens last and not deal with them, and do all of these like quite ludicrous things. Because they've decided to paint the Greens as extremists on this, and Labor has let them.
Yeah, well, and as you say, I mean, the motion around social cohesion, like that kind of language, that's the exact language that is used in this letter from the Zionist groups. They say that, Greens have undermined social cohesion. They, quote, threatened the foundations of our freedoms and democracy. They say the Greens have knowingly spread outright falsehoods, including the monstrous lie that this government is complicit in genocide. And in doing so, the Greens have joined forces with and incited political and religious extremists who have at times engaged in violence. And like that's clearly, like this is a very specific points that they want Labor to know that, well, and I guess the LNP as well, but, you know, Labor in particular, that it's unacceptable to describe what's happening in any way as a genocide. And to do so is aligning yourself with extremists. And we will call it that. And they're showing that they will in the kind of campaigns that they're mounting against the Greens, like looking at what is happening in Queensland, for example, the ads that are running up here led by the Queensland Jewish Collective ahead of the state election. There's been like a little bit of coverage, I think, of this. You probably would have seen they're doing like billboards and flyers. They've done a few, and they're now doing these billboards and flyers in collaboration with, I guess, what they would describe as the, quote, you know, Hindu and Iranian communities or community groups. But the links are, I guess, nebulous, and they kind of will cherry pick particular groups for these series of ads that basically say, I'm Jewish and the Greens don't stand for me, I'm Hindu and the Greens don't stand for me, and, you know, I'm Iranian and the Greens don't stand for me.
Yeah. I mean, I saw a piece in the Australian about this movement, you know, multi-faith group standing up to the Greens. And my immediate take was because it was a reported piece, not an opinion piece, but the Australian was very much celebrating this as an idea of this multi-faith group and leaning on their religions. And I thought, hang on, didn't we have like weeks of hysteria over the idea of a Muslim vote advocacy group.
Right. We're a secular country then.
We don't have religious-based parties in this country or religious-based movements. And yet when it is a group doing it to attack the Greens, suddenly that's great. Their faith is really important.
Yeah. Well, and even, as a lot of people pointed out, the Australian Jewish Association being directly involved in or like promoting and sharing these demands for the major parties to preference the Greens last or refuse to do any deals with the Greens, they're a registered charity, which is, technically prohibited from engaging in that kind of like partisan politics or political lobbying. But it's, yes, of course, the Australian will back it in all the way. And like looking at, if you actually look at the flyers that Queensland Jewish Council Collective are distributing, for example, the person that they've got or the group that they've got to support the Iranian side is the Iran Novin Party, which is a royalist Iranian political party that supported the US-backed dictator, the Shah, Reza Shah. The Hindu person, they can't even get a single person who is Hindu to put their face or name to this. So they literally have stock images of Hindu-looking people on their billboards and flyers that say, like, representative image only. They use the synonym M Hindu. And even, Queensland Jewish Collective, like, I'm not to not argue that it doesn't involve, a bunch of Jewish people. I know that there are Jewish people involved in it, but one of the key spokespersons, Joshua Turia, I think, is not even Jewish himself. And so it does become like it really starts to feel, especially when they are using the, almost identical imagery, messaging, like style guide. A lot of their materials look as though they could have been developed by Advance. They're using the same framing around the Greens aren't about the environment anymore. They're extreme. We used to support them, but now we don't because of this. Like, it does, I don't know if you saw the thread on Twitter by, I think it's Zedek Collective, who was pointing out the links. We can put the link in the show note, but the links between some of these groups and Advance. And like, for example, the Australian Jewish Association's president, David Adler, sits on the board of Advance. Like, I do not buy that. Putting aside any criticism that you might have around, I guess, mixing religion and politics. But I also don't buy that this is like a cultural and religious kind of community uprising against the Greens.
No, like it had a whiff of Advance about it. Often stuff that's being run in the Australian is very similar to like whatever campaign or social media graphics Advance are pushing. They'll just do it in their branding. I did not know that about the Jewish spokesperson not actually being Jewish.
No, he's,
I mean, there seems to be like a little bit, not many, I'm not in any way questioning, that many people involved in Zionism are Jewish, but there seems to be a number of like white Christians who are just so interested in
Christian
this issue.
Zionism is huge,
Like there was a tweet the other day from someone, it was a pro-Palestine anti-Zionist Jew on Twitter, quote tweeting Chip LeGrand, the reporter for The Age, who is like obsessed with calling anti-Zionism anti-Semitism. And they were like, why is Chip LeGrand so obsessed with Jewish people? Like, why are you so obsessed with me?
No, it's like...
why have some... people decided to make this like their issue.
I know. Well, and it's a circle that you can't square because I think the argument, like Zionism relies on, in large part, the lie that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism because, Zionism is synonymous with and, the same as Judaism. And you can't separate the two, and obviously, yes, they're inextricably linked, but they're not the same thing. But at the same time,
because you have many anti-Zionist Jews, and
exactly,
loud and proud organizations protesting against this genocide and against what Zionism has come to represent.
I know, and so then at the same time, when Zionist groups will sort of they try to say, no, well, we are Jewish, like we are all the Jews and we are Judaism, because if you hate us, you hate Jews and you're anti-Semitic. But at the same time, we're broader than that. And, we also include Christians and we also include Hindus and we include Iranian people because, yes, we all believe in this project and it's about democracy and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, you actually can't have both, I don't think. Like, you can recognize that it's a political ideology, but that means that then you would lose being able to say that, yes, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, which it's not.
Yeah. I mean, it's everyone said it till they're blue in the face about anti-Zionism not being anti-Semitism. There was a really wonderful piece in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age yesterday from Dr. Jenna Price, who's a journalist, academic, and is Jewish, and basically making an argument that, again, has been made many times before, that you can be Jewish and disagree with what the state of Israel is doing, and to blindly support it is actually, and to buy into this idea that Zionism is Judaism, you're actually making Jews in the diaspora and Jews worldwide less safe by implicating them in what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing.
Exactly.
It was quite a elegant, nuanced, sad piece of writing. And then today I saw Nick Drayenfirth, he's a Labor guy, and he's also he's involved with one of the Jewish organisations as well, as I think. I saw him tweet, "I won't be writing for the Sydney Morning Herald anymore because they published this." And it comes back to, I think, Albanese not getting any credit for showing up to a synagogue and being like 80% pro-Israel, which is that, like, Sydney Morning Herald has been pumping out the anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And they published one nuanced piece in the opinion section, and he's like, "I won't write for this anti-Semitic newspaper anymore." No. Like, we're not allowed to have nuance. Like, we're not allowed to have a debate about it.
Only blind allegiance to the state of Israel. Like, that is it. That's it.
That was his take. And I was just like, dude, this paper has been terrible. Like, the stuff they were putting out on the weekend, Peter Hartcher did an entire piece conflating the protests with suggesting that, like, that people protesting don't realise they're on the side of evil, complaining the protesters, those going out on the Sunday, as people have done for an entire year now, with Nazis. That's the kind of stuff this newspaper is printing from its actual, like, major political columnists. And
that's
then
one should print though,
one opinion piece being like, you know what, I don't support what Israel's doing and it's tearing my family apart, and it's actually making Jews less safe. And
no good.
Now it's an evil, terrible anti-Semitic paper.
Yes. Well, look, we can't finish the show though without talking about the other. I don't know if I even have an elegant segue for this, but Fatima Payman's new political party launched this week. This is the former Labor Senator, WA, left the party to sit as an independent after effectively being pushed out because she crossed the floor and refused to support Labor's position on Palestine. She has now announced the creation of a new party called Australia's Voice, and she's claiming that, quote, disenfranchised former supporters of both major parties have already pledged their support. She says the party will run candidates in seats around the country, potentially including directly against her former Labor colleagues. My first question, thoughts on the name, Australia's Voice?
Oh, it's not good, is it? I mean, pretty much, like, all political party names are bad. So, like, it was going to be pretty hard for her to come up with something that wasn't bad. Like, I actually think maybe just having called it the Fatima Payman Party might have been better and might have made it clearer what this is.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't think there is making clear what it is, because she doesn't seem to understand what it is either. And a lot of the interviews she was doing even before the name dropped in the lead up were very coy and very like, you'll just have to wait and see what our policies are.
Yeah.
And we're going to be bold. We need a bolder party than Labor, but we're not going to be as bold as the Greens. We're going to be more pragmatic.
Yeah.
So it was trying to say what will be like somewhere in between the two and the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
While not putting forward any
whatever you want it to be, really. I mean, even when she's announcing the party, she says, quote, Australians are fed up with the major parties having a duopoly, a stranglehold over our democracy. If we need to drag them kicking and screaming to do what needs to be done, we will do it. And it's like, but what? What needs to be done?
Yeah.
What are the policies? I think she's been saying that they will be announced in the future. They'll focus on, quote, progressive reform in areas like housing, education, tax, and cost of living. So what? Everything? But I guess like the one thing that is clear, or that she's made clear, is that this isn't a party that is primarily about Palestine or Muslim rights, which is, I guess, the broad assumption from a lot of people when she left Labor. And there is this kind of movement for, Muslim votes, that maybe she's going to go and set up a party that's going to capitalize on disenfranchised Muslim voters and people who support Palestine who might leave Labor on that issue.
Well, look, I think she knows there aren't necessarily enough votes in that. And she's being advised by Glenn Drury, who they call the preference whisperer, because he used to organise all the kind of dodgy preference deals that had all the micro-parties feeding into each other, so that a bunch of micro-parties got up, but not all of them, but like one would get all the votes in the end. That isn't possible anymore because the voting system has changed, but people do still call him the preference whisperer because he's quite a sneaky political operator. I think the advice is going for this kind of middle of the road, like progressive but kind of undefined, might be like a safer space politically.
Yeah.
It really has been incredibly disappointing though, because I mean, Fatima Payman left Labor really standing on her principles, and it was really quite, you could see there was a lot of anguish and a lot of like genuine conviction from her. But this new vehicle feels just kind of sus and kind of, I don't want to say opportunistic, because I don't think that people shouldn't be allowed to start new parties if they don't think that any of the current ones are serving them. But when she can't quite define what it is or what it's for, I don't know that it's going to pick up. I mean, the thing is, we're creating a party that runs in the Senate. She's also going to run in House seats. But, I looked into this when I interviewed Purple Pingers after his John Vanderlam, after his Vic Socialists Senate bid was announced. And, it is extremely hard at this point for anyone kind of in each state at the moment. You kind of get 2 Labor, 2 Coalition, 1 Green and 1 right-wing party. That's kind of all there is space for. That's not to say people shouldn't be allowed to have a go. But if you believe Labor's not progressive enough, is not the progressive party that's most likely to take that progressive left-wing spot in the Senate the safest bet or the best place to try to achieve more progressive outcomes? I mean, again, I think people should be allowed to create their own thing if they think that they have a better idea, but she doesn't seem to have a better idea.
What is the better idea? Yeah. And I think, who knows, like maybe she'll come out and announce some really cool policies. I don't know, but I think someone pointed out in this is her announcement, I think like her press conference for this new political party, and she quoted both Gough Whitlam and Robert Menzies, which I think is like very telling as to where she is trying to position herself. And like, I certainly, obviously, I've criticized the Teals a lot for not having a clear kind of policy position or politics really. But even then, when you went to the 2022 election, it was, what was it? Climate, integrity, and gender were like, those were the issues. And so like even some themes would be nice.
They also have extensive policies on their websites. I've been thinking about that a lot in the last few days because I've read about Rebecca Sharkey this week who has no policies on her website.
Really?
And I was like, but the Teals do and Bob Catter does. And it's well, but should they really when they have absolutely no chance of implementing those policies? But at the same time, I think it's healthy to lay them out. Whereas Rebecca Sharkey, like,
just nothing.
You don't know what she stands for.
Just vibe. Well, this is the thing. Like, apparently Fatima Payman's, I haven't looked at her website, but I saw somewhere that her website is full of words like be brave and speak up and speak out. And it's like, brave about what? Like, what are you talking about? I mean, I will say though, I don't necessarily just returning quickly to the name, because the criticism as well is not just that it's like vague and people won't know what it's about, but that this, she's called it Australia's voice in the wake of a failed referendum for an Indigenous voice to Parliament. And she said, she didn't consult with anyone involved in the Uluru Statement from the Heart.
And there's been some anger about that.
Yes. Like, it's like, oh, you're Australia's voice, are you? That's a bit presumptuous. And David Spears said, he straight up said in his analysis in ABC, it's a, quote, unsubtle attempt to scoop up supporters of the yes case in last year's referendum. I don't know about that. Maybe Glenn Drury is that cynical. Like, maybe that is a thing that someone somewhere thinks, but I feel like that's a bit of a stretch.
She has said that she and her husband came up with the name. There was a piece in the Nine papers pointing out that actually there was a party with the same name as this many years ago that was an anti-Muslim party that Glenn Drury was tangentially involved in his preference for Spring Days. And he would have had to have known that this name has been used before for that. And, when questions were sort of put to Fatima Payman, she said she and her husband came up with the name. So I don't know if Glenn Drury didn't point that out or did.
He's worked with everyone, hasn't he? So maybe he just forgets all the little micro parties.
When you've worked with Ricky Muir's Motoring Enthusiast Party,
it's all just a blur.
Why could I remember that?
Yeah. Oh,
I actually found a fabulous, when I was doing my Rebecca Sharkey piece on the parliamentary website, like one of the many pages they have is like parties over time, and it's like lines across the screen, like Labor's been there to start this big red line, and then like all these minor parties over the years. And we have more and more and more minor parties now. I mean, they kind of they peaked before 2016 as well, when the laws were changed, so that there wasn't such an advantage. But we now have, Jared Rennick's Australia First Party, because he's left the Liberals. Yeah. We have a Tammy Terrell party now, I believe, because she's left the Jackie Lampy network.
That's right.
So we just, people peel off and decide to have parties instead of being independents.
Yeah. And of course it rarely works out for them. Like, we know that this story generally is that they don't hold onto their seats once they try and go it alone. If they've won the seat with a major party, it's very rare that, a few obviously have made it through. Pauline Hanson's made it through, the Catters have established themselves, but like, it's, yes, the prospects for this party, this new Australia's Voice, are not great electorally at the moment. We sort of, like, I think on the pod we'd spoken when Fatima first left Labor to be an independent about whether that was quote unquote fair to the voters who had put her in there on a Labor ticket. And I guess my view was, and probably still is, that in that instance, it's like, well, she wanted to vote in accordance with Labor policy, and that's what people had voted for. And so that was very fair. Now that she started a new party and will use, I guess, the resources and platform that she has as a senator to advance that, I don't know, I think that brings in a new question.
I think it's just something that we have to be consistent on. I remember this Fatima Payman discussion and, people who felt aggrieved by Lydia Thorpe leaving the Greens, but then were fine with Fatima Payman doing it. I mean, it's her position. She won it fair and square. Like, she got elected, and as you point out, is also actually abiding by the Labor platform. Yeah. But we can't, I don't know that we can be like, oh, you can stay, but you can't do this with the position, or you can stay, but you can't. Like, people got elected, and all this, like, oh, but she wouldn't have been elected without Labor votes, and she only got this many below the line. It's like, it doesn't matter really. Like, they put her in third, and she has that seat for 6 years if she wants it.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I do think, I guess I start to have a slightly different view. If she were then to, I guess, advance a new party that has a platform dramatically different to the Labor Party, there's an argument that, Labor voters are not getting what they voted for effectively. So I can see that she's then got 6 years of that. But
I mean, I think I actually think, like, I'm trying to think of an example of someone really doing the opposite of what they were elected to do. For example, like that Democrat who famously became a Labor person, that's very much going against the spirit of people who chose to vote for a third party and then go to a major party.
True, yeah.
But, yeah, if Fatima Payman wants to be slightly to the left of Labor, then
there probably were people who would have voted for that. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see what she pursues. I haven't really seen her have a deciding vote in any Senate votes or take part in any negotiations. I don't know if the Labor government is just freezing her out, but she now has a balance of power vote. And, I've seen her post things on Instagram about negative gearing and the need for reform. So she kind of just has that kind of like Labor left platform. Like there are people in Labor left who think that should be done as well still. So she kind of has those like Labor policies without being completely burned by the 2016-2019 results kind of Labor.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, look, I look forward to seeing more of her bold, brave voice policies.
Pragmatic.
Bold, yes, but pragmatic as well. Not like those pesky, dangerous, annoying Greens, the feudalistic Greens.
And nobody knows how I survive on worms 3 times a day.
Okay, so look, it's that time. Call to action. You had a call to action this week in relation to, is it the Victorian local government elections?
Yeah, just before we came on, I saw someone sharing a website called WeVoteForPalestine.net. And if you go to it, it's about the Victorian Council elections are going on right now, and there's a place where you can sign a pledge to show that you would be voting only for pro-Palestine candidates, and I think there will also be ways to find out which candidates have signed on to their solidarity pledge as well.
Yeah,
I don't know who's organising this, but certainly we have
people can Google who authorised it. I didn't get to the bottom of it by the time you said.
But if you go to the Who We Are, they list Bring Back for Palestine, Moonee Valley for Palestine, like it's each electorate. So I think go and have a look if you're in Victoria.
Cool. Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes. And then my one as we only have 50% green tax on the show, so I've got to do my bit this week, which is to say, I guess in those elections, Victorian local government elections, also the ACT elections next weekend, and then the weekend after that, the Queensland state elections, get on a booth for the Greens, please, if you are so inclined. Particularly in Queensland where it's the most important, but wherever you are, contact your local campaign, because I know that booth rostering is happening and they need people to distribute how to vote cards and all of that. And don't forget to actually please vote Greens, everyone. Please also, if you want to support the show as well, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Give us a 5-star review there or wherever you're listening now. You can follow Rachel at Rachel R. Withers on X/Twitter, and you can read more of her work on her website, which we'll put in the show notes or in Crikey as well, and listen to her show on Triple R Radio. If you want to find and share our clips on social media at Serious Danger AU, we're on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Don't forget to get your tickets as well for the New South Wales shows that I mentioned next month, 23rd and 24th of November. You'll find all the things that you need at seriousdangerpod.com. Thanks again, Rachel. You might be breaking the record. Is that 3 episodes you've been on now? I don't know if that puts you in the lead.
One as a guest and 2 as a co-host. I will say, I feel like I got out my spin cycle rage. We've got spin cycle on hiatus for 3 weeks, but all of my complaints about the media kind of all came out
filling your void.
In this.
All right, well, happy to be that platform for you. All right.
Serious Danger Australia.